this is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and today I'm going to be discussing white-black in Takir Dragonstorm. So as the notes are available to follow along at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. So we're back to discussing a two-color pair. By frequency that they're drafted, according to 17 lands on tap disagree strongly about this. According to 17 lands, Boros is drafted more than any other color pair by more than 5 times as much, with white-black being the second most common, but just absolutely dwarfed by Boros. While, according to Untapped, it's much closer, with like Simic being drafted about 3/4 as often as Boros, while Orzhov is like 40% as much. Some of that is going to be due to the two sites classifying their color breakdowns differently, but it's still like a bit of a wild difference. The win rates roughly match the play rates, where, Boros is drafted more than the other colors and wins more, and then like the next, like the other more popular colors win proportionately. White-black is, not impressive, not bad, it's fine. So we're still talking about drafting a two-color deck, which means that you are generally going to expect your deck is going to be at lower power levels than your opponents. So it's best if you can have a proactive plan in the game before they get to, cast all their best cards. But white-black is making some trade-offs for speed, like trading away some speed compared to Boros to mostly gain resilience, as I think about it, with some other potentials going on. But like, you have a lot of creatures that are just like 2 bodies for in one card, so removal ends up less well against you. In a way, I think that white-black's core strategy is to make the opponent's cards bad. Like, your cards aren't a very high power level, but a lot of opposing cards are bad against you. Like, removal is weaker than it would be against other decks. And if you have a bunch of removal, then you can just kill their good creatures. So you're kind of like, yeah, your cards are like objectively weaker on their face, but by kind of like not having vulnerabilities or exploiting removal spells, you can kind of compete on even footing. So let's talk about the go wide thing, because I'm just kind of stating that like black-white has a bunch of like wide bodies that removal is bad against. Like, what are they? Why is that always the case? So the top commons for white-black are basically Salt Road, Pack Beast, and things that support trying to go wide, like Mardu Devotee, which doesn't exactly go wide, like it's one creature in one card, but it gives you a 1-mana play, and it helps like, set up your draws to curve out better. And so it like the Scry 2 is kind of providing some card advantage, so it's a little bit like Thraben Inspector, which is a little bit like going wide. And then Fortress Kinguard, Kintree Nurturer, Sandskitter Outrider. So like really all of the, whatever that mechanic is called, where you get the counter or the guy, it's just all the cards with that mechanic that perform well in white-black, which, good on them. Like, that's what white-black is supposed to be doing, and it appears to be succeeding, where those are all the top common creatures in the archetype, in terms of success, not just like people are trying to do that. That is to say that it appears from the data that like the synergy, the plan for white-black like worked. Like, you play those cards perform relatively well, and leaning more into it seems to lead to good results. And then outside of the creatures, there are some other things in the top performing commons, like good interactive spells like Caustic Exhale and Aggressive Negotiations are also among the top performing commons. It's not just those creatures, but the creatures are kind of all creatures on that plan. And then there are a bunch of cards that are kind of like good if and only if you're going wide. Stuff like Worthy Cost and Duty Beyond Death. Though Duty Beyond Death doesn't perform super well but I've had good experiences with it, I should say. Uncommons, outside of Sonic Shrieker, which is just, a very, very successful, powerful uncommon that can go in whatever, the top uncommons are Descendant of Storms, which is a creature, Mardu Monument, which goes wide, Teeming Dragonstorm, like 2 creatures and 1 card. And like those are the top commons in white black, or top uncommons in white black, but those are not the top overall uncommons in their colors. They perform better in white black relative to in other common archetypes, showing that like white black is really taking advantage of this like multiple bodies thing. So from this, I conclude that like the go wide synergies are real, they're well supported, they're what you're supposed to be pursuing. It's like genuinely what this deck is doing, and it's like not a trap to do that thing. So like if white black stats are lower than you'd want them to be, the way to correct for the stats isn't to find something fancy or like not do the thing or assume that the stats are low because the thing is bad. The thing is good. It's just the thing's power level is what it is, and white black might just not be the strongest color combination because the cards like aren't that strong. The thing it does isn't that strong, but it's still the best thing you can do when you're in that lane. And that all checks out to me and makes sense in that like the white black uncommons aren't particularly good, so you're not like getting access to more good cards by playing white black. You're getting access to fewer good cards because you're not getting the gold cards from any other color or the 3-color gold cards. So your options are kind of narrow. And while you might be able to use some of the white and black cards better than other people are using them, that's not adding to the total number of cards that like you're going to see in the draft that you could play in your deck if you wanted to. So that's kind of my overall thought about the strength or power level of white black, or like what you should be doing with it. I noticed that most white black decks that trophy tend to have like 6 plus or minus 2 removal spells, so 4 to 8 removal spells, which is interesting to me because one of the things that I personally struggle with go wide decks is like, okay, I have a bunch of creatures that have synergy with other creatures. So does that mean I'm just supposed to like draft all creatures? Like how much removal should I play? How much is it worth like diluting my synergies to like get the removal? But also at the same time, it feels like white black really wants removal because you need to bring your opponent down to your level. You need to be able to answer their bombs, or your kind of like little 1/1s won't really do anything. And so it looks like the answer is around 6. Another thing that I want to talk about is the weird relationship that white black has with like the big game, small game question. And this is a space that I've never really thought about in these terms, which is that I think that white black is good in small games or big games, but not medium games. And I haven't really thought, because this is the first time I've thought about things in those terms, I'm not sure how many other decks like fit into that framing or follow that trajectory. But now that I've identified it, I'll look for it in other places, and I want to explain it a little bit more. So in small games, your 2-for-1 creatures matter because you're trading resources a lot, and like the fact that you have like a random 1/1 body left over is good for you, because the whole point of the small games is that like every object matters more, and so those 1/1s get stronger in the small games, and your like 1-for-1 removal is kind of like good in the small games. You need to be able to answer the big thing. In the big games, you have removal for the most important things, and your like creature synergy go wide stuff is like working at its best, and so your opponent can't find good attacks because you have a lot of options about double blocking, and if they have something big, you can potentially like chump block and race, and whatever synergies you have are functioning at full power, so your cards are presumably more than some of their parts. So you do well in big games. But in medium games, where you and your opponent each have some creatures, there's not enough removal to kill everything that matters, now your opponent's creatures are probably just outclassing your creatures. I'm not sure like exactly what the actionable takeaway from yes, you want polarized games is. Like that's a weird thing to draft for, but I think that that's the space that it operates in. This deck can win in Boros like ways, where you just kind of like go wide, kill your opponent's stuff. They can't stabilize, you push enough damage, they're dead. You're giving up like a little bit of power, so you're like, less likely to kill them on turn 5 and more likely to kill them on turn 6, less likely to kill them on turn 6 and more likely to kill them on turn 7. So your opponent like gets an extra turn to stabilize probably on average or something. But in exchange, you kind of make their cards worse. Their removal spells, like the removal spells in other decks, line up less well against you. And theoretically, you might be relatively good against Boros. Like both decks are going wide, so creatures kind of run into each other and don't push damage. And then you're theoretically better at the longer game because you built your deck expecting to need to play a longer game, and you have kind of some grindier synergies, presumably. Whale, the -1/-1 to all your opponent's creatures or get 2 cards back, comes to mind as a card that's specifically very good in like white black against white red games. Hardened Tactician is one of the most played uncommon in white black, since there's like no competition. Like it's the white black card. I mean, there are 2 white black cards. They're 2 most played cards because nobody else wants them, so they end up in the white black decks, and that's fine. They're not like actively bad cards. I think they're both just like, like filler type power level. They both sometimes perform better than that, but also sometimes they just don't really work out or matter. And I think that, both of the white black uncommons, you should sometimes have white black decks where you've drafted that card but don't play it. They're kind of like at the border power level where sometimes you should play it and sometimes not, and it's probably a tiny bit overplayed, but it kind of should be the most played card in white black, even if you shouldn't be prioritizing it or playing it all the time, just because like the white black players are always going to have it, usually going to play it. That's what I have to say about those guys. Yeah, I think that you're an assertive mid-range deck, and I think that the thing where you excel in small games or big games, but not medium games, might be something to like think about and keep your eye on while you're playing games. And I think that you can kind of make choices about like, okay, I need to decide in this game which of those games I'm trying to play and try to avoid like being wishy-washy about it and end up somewhere in the middle where you're trading resources and you find yourself in a mid-range game because you're like the wrong amount of careful about like navigating, okay, I'm going to trade everything off to end up in a small game versus, okay, nothing's going to trade. I'm going to try to like hold off until I have a bunch of creatures in play and play a big game here. So, every game is different. Every matchup's different. There might be spots where you are supposed to end up in like a kind of mid-sized game, but maybe try to really think about like based on the colors they're seeing, the cards you're seeing from how they're playing, what size game they want to be playing, and think about what steps you can take to try to get to the other one and not end up in the middle somewhere. And those are my thoughts. I think there's some good theory in there, but maybe a little disjointed about the like particular advice. But really, I think once you know the basics of like play about 6 removal spells and prioritize all the cards that actually go wide, like do that thing, and then that'll open up the door for some cards that are only good if you've done that thing. A card that deals damage based on the number of creatures, the stuff that sacrifices creatures. There just ends up being a lot of support for it, pack beast type cards once you're there. And so if you just prioritize the commons that make tokens, and then you'll just kind of find that other stuff, prioritize it more than stuff that doesn't do that, and you should end up with like a pretty coherent deck where you don't necessarily need to have a precise understanding of the exact power level of all the cards. If you just kind of like normal good cards, but take that stuff when you can. And the advice is kind of like don't don't obsess over going like too extreme or too linear, because you do like want to have that interaction. And I think you want to take advantage of the fact that you can be happy in big or small games and kind of try to like be flexible and change from game to game which one your deck is actually doing. So now I'm going to turn it over to chat for questions. As always, I want to remind everyone that the podcast does have Patreon, and if you choose to support it, that does make me feel appreciated and help encourage me to keep making the podcast as well as supporting my collaborators. So be sure to check out patreon.com/drafting archetypes if you'd like to get involved in that. So, chat, what do you want me to discuss? Thoughts on pump or combat tricks versus removal for go wide creature focused decks? I think that I would prefer to have removal in most cases, though it's always a rate question, but that it's okay to have some combat tricks. And like in particular, the +3/+0 draw card trick is good in white black because you're likely going to be able to use that as like sack a token, kill a creature, draw a card, which is pretty good. You're not going to get like total choice over which creature you kill, but often that's going to be good enough. And like in Boros, I think a lot of the time you would rather have the +2/+0 first strike flash enchantment, because with that you kill a blocker and keep tempo with a creature in play, and now that creature has more power, so your like tempo's increased. You're going to be closing the game faster. Whereas in white black, you prefer the +3/+0 draw card because you care more about the fact that you like got that card and you're up a card rather than that you have kept an object in play, because you don't value like a 3/1 token as much as you value another card, and you don't mind that you need to spend the mana to use the card that you drew. So which combat tricks you're interesting changes depending on like what your game plan is, what your creatures are. There are some combat tricks that are good on big creatures and some that are good on small creatures. There are some combat tricks that are good with evasive creatures and some combat tricks that are good specifically with creatures that don't have evasion. So, tailor your combat tricks toward the ones that are good for using with 1/1s, I guess. I remember you saying Lorwyn Fairies are an example of a deck that can go both small and big games. This set has a Bitter Blossom at uncommon and rare in black. Do you think those kinds of effects are why white-black feels like both sides of the spectrum work out? So if we're talking about like the guy that pays life and mana to make tokens as a uncommon Bitter Blossom, I wouldn't say that that guy in particular is strongly factoring into my assessment of white black's power level because I never really play it. And I assume that the 1/3 flyer that endures when it attacks is the rare Bitter Blossom. And that card's good, but it's not going to be very definitive defining. It's not going to like factor in all that much to why white black plays the way that it does, just because it's a rare. So I think that there's similarity there in that like both decks are kind of, this like go wide scaling benefits creature synergy deck with underpowered creatures. And so there are like shared reasons why they excel at both big and small games. But I don't think that cards that are similar to Bitter Blossom is the reason for that. I'm interpreting the statement about combat tricks as I should consider board affecting spells versus ephemeral tricks. No, I mean, that's kind of what I was saying is like, to me, like Boros is looking for the board affecting spell. If by board affecting you mean like leaves an object on the board with the +2/+0 enchantment, versus ephemeral tricks where white black prefers the like draw a card, lose my creature trick. But board affecting spells, you might mean like enchantments that affect your creatures or something rather than a combat trick. or if by board affecting you mean affects the whole board, like a trumpet blast style effect, but that's weird to contrast with ephemeral. So I'm not sure exactly what you're taking from based on that statement, but I hope that having talked about it more, it's clear what I'm suggesting. Is this archetype among the white archetypes best suited for a Tempest Hawk package? Yes. Yes, it is. Your removal makes it easier to get in with your Tempest Hawks, which play a grindy game well and help you go wide. I haven't personally actually played a Tempest Hawk package, though I have thought about it. And I do think that playing like 3 to 5 Tempest Hawks in a white black deck that doesn't have too many other 3 drops could work out well. What should the thought process be when considering moving from black white to Mardu? Just opening enough compelling gold cards, parentheses, and good enough fixing, or seeing cards that in red that meaningfully support what black is doing. For example, if you're very good at going wide, then like War Effort would make a lot of sense as a splash. Obviously, you want to be careful about your mana, especially since you're like going to be a more like assertive deck. If you're more base white black, if you're going to splash, make sure that it's not like messing up your like plan too much, not adding too much inconsistency or too much slowness in the form of tapped lands. But yeah, compelling cards that are either like gold cards in Mardu or effectively gold cards, like high synergy cards with the stuff that you're doing in white black. And then moving from like white black to Abzan, I think that's going to be more about either just opening powerful Abzan cards or getting a pull to like pivot into like the +1/+1 counter space where you start planning to use your Endure creatures differently than you were going to. I suppose having Mardu devotees would be a good step toward fixing from black-white to Mardu. Yes, absolutely. Do you find white-black to be more aggressive, tempo, or controlling? More attrition than tempo and more aggressive than controlling, which is a slightly uncommon pairing, but not radically uncommon. It's like the heavier removal versions of red aggro. And I say more aggressive than controlling just because by nature of being a 2-color deck, it kind of has to be assertive in this format. How does the Abzan Devotee play in this space as a card that can blank removal and act as extra bodies for trading? Or is its value still very reliant on how much the green fixing is needed? No, there are definitely white-black decks that can make good use of Abzan Devotee. To me, it's kind of about like it's not great at going wide in like the pack beast sense unless there's like trading off and grinding happening, but it is good at going wide in the like enabling sacrifice outlets sense. So it's kind of like more of a small game card than a big game card, and more like it just has synergies with a slightly different set of the black white cards where it's looking more to be paired with stuff that cares about sacrificing than that cares about having a big board. Do Russian Sun Shield and Loxodon Battle Priest fit under the category of cards that are best in either small games or big games? And if yes, could they be decent in white black, though they are not go wide cards? I see what you're saying with the suggestion that they are. Like the 1/1 counters from Battle Priest theoretically matter more in a small game because it's a like bigger scale of impact, and it plays well in big games because that's more likely to kind of grind to a halt and you get more turns worth of counters. And then Sun Shield, in a small game you can like tap their only creature. In a big game presumably they have like a varied board and it's more likely that they have a big creature that's important to tap. My guess is that they could be decent in white black, but they're not as good as the go wide cards. What do you think of equipments in this space? Both having extra bodies and when you want to trade with those bodies seem on strategy. I agree. This is definitely the right space for equipment. It helps with being assertive. It's much more attrition than tempo. Like you're spending mana to be able to trade up and like having a stream of stuff to use for it makes sense. And the like white uncommon equipment that draws a card, if you have like 3 attackers, definitely fits as like a go wide payoff. I don't remember if its stats are indicative that it just like is like too low a power level card to work out well, but certainly if it's good anywhere, it's good here and it's doing the right kind of thing. And I would definitely be open to playing it at the moment if, my deck is functioning the way it's supposed to function and that looks good in it. But, equipment could be relatively good while the specific equipment is just like not at a good enough rate for it to like actually perform well. So I'm going to actually quickly check the stats. It is amusingly the single worst performing uncommon. So my advice about that one might actually be bad. It is possible that you should just not be playing it. I like the reasoning, but again, like I was saying, it is possible that it can be like a good fit, but just not the right rate regardless. And the data suggests reasonably strongly that that's what's happening here. So I like the thinking, but looks like best not to get involved. How many negotiations, and do they count as removal slots? Ultimately, I think they kind of have to count as removal in terms of deck construction, where like your amount of creature, like your number of creatures is kind of the more fixed number in terms of like making your synergies work and stuff. Like that's where your hard floor is going to be. And I think number is very like curve dependent. But it's a strong card that performs well if you have, like a lot of 2s and not a lot of 3s, then I think it's going to be pretty good in your deck. Kind of like play them. But you don't want to draft them too high if your curve isn't definitely going to support that well. Is the uncommon dragon worth playing in white black? I think it's just like pretty obviously good. There are a number of different uncommons, but I'm assuming that you're talking about the black one with the white adventure, Purging Stormbrood, which is the second best performing black uncommon and kind of like a transparently good card. So, yes, it's worth playing. What power level would you consider splashing with a bad mana base in a deck like this? I don't know, like a true bomb? Are you ever wanting desperate measures builds? I am low sample size on spaces where it's made sense for me to experiment with desperate measures, so I'm low confidence in my answer on that. Its stats are playable but unexciting, so I would assume that some portion of the time you do want it. Presumably, I think I would play it more often than not if I had it. I think that's going to wrap us up. So, thanks for listening, everyone. That was White Black. I will be back next week with continued coverage of archetypes in Takir. Thanks especially to those in chat for questions. Have a good week, and for now,
prepare for light speed.